you have an infinity right there, the essence of that liquid term.
804 to dispatch, 1023 at 113. It's utter chaos in here. I think we'll need some reinforcement. Also, someone recalls seeing two suspicious vehicles. Do you copy?
5804, 102. Go ahead.
It seems to have been a white refrigerator truck modified with fans on the side, while the other was a normal station wagon, which may have been black in color. Both vehicles have since left the area, though.
5804, 104.
William 6502 to dispatch, 113-1052. There's a couple people having serious problems breathing, and one going through convulsions as we speak. Need an ambulance ASAP.
6502, 104. Okay, I'll handle it from here. Assistance will be on the way shortly.
It started with this man, Shoko Asahara. He came from an impoverished family where he happened to be the fourth son of 7 children. Having been born with glaucoma meant he was completely blind in one eye and had very little vision in the other. And since his parents were unable to give him the care he needed, he was sent to study at the School for the Blind, a special but isolated place far from home. The school would often provide government subsidies and free meals, which were especially convenient for their financial situation. So much so that even his younger brother with normal eyesight was persuaded to enroll in the same school. Asahara would remain there for the 14 years to follow, where he spent most of his time being a nuisance to everyone in his vicinity. He used his partial blindness as a means of asserting power over the fully blind students, which enabled him to physically bully and extort money from them. Asahara once even inflicted a broken eardrum on a classmate, and later on, in high school, he lost every attempt at the class office because classmates were frightened of him. The same behavior would follow him for the rest of his life, except on a much bigger scale. After graduating, he received some informal training and ended up working as an acupuncturist, a common career decision for the blind in Japan. Additionally, he also operated a pharmacy that claimed to specialize in herbal medicine. Those claims were far from the truth though, and it wasn't long before the authorities caught up to that. They discovered that Asahara had been running the shop without the necessary permits, resulting in his arrest and the subsequent collapse of his business. Not having much on the line, Asahara would start one of the deadliest cults known to humanity.
一つ二つ三つ四つ五つ
Disguised as a religious yoga gathering center, the Aum Shinrikyo cult preached a blend of Buddhism and Hinduism, with Asahara on top as the holy figure. From the beginning, Asahara's teachings were pretty out there. He told his followers that if he ordered them to take someone's life, it would indicate that the person's time was already up. In other words, any guilt you may feel towards the person would be unjustified, since you're killing them at precisely the right time. It's this peculiar teaching that created an environment where brutality and violence could thrive. All members were divided into 3 tiers. At the top were the leaders, Asahara's closest advisors and friends. Next came the upper level authorities, who were praised to be extremely knowledgeable about science and highly skilled in the use of advanced technology. And below them were the regular recruits, who abandoned their normal life for the sake of being a part of the organization. Similarly, as quoted by an ex-member of the cult, followers feared Asahara on 3 different levels. The first level is that you're ignored by Asahara and are denied religious training. At the second level, you're told that you'll go to hell if you betray him. And finally, you get involved in a homicide and realize that the next victim may as well be you. The initiation process used psychedelic drugs such as LSD to enhance the experience for a newcomer, while those already in the cult were subjected to repetitive sleep deprivation, isolation, and exposure to videos depicting dead bodies as a means of maintaining control over them. That said though, drugs were not only used in initiations, but in punishments as well. Many members lost their minds due to repeated drug-induced states and wandered aimlessly throughout the compounds, not knowing who they were or what they were doing. Was directly preying to the vulnerable, primarily people suffering from depression, struggling with relationships, financial problems, or mental and physical illnesses, reassuring them that once they become a part of the group, all of those struggles would be over with. Although the promises had no basis in reality, he understood that a glimmer of hope was all they needed to join the success of which single-handedly relied on Asahara's ability to reach that particular group of people, and he did so through the use of 3 distinct recruitment methods. As you can tell, the person in the picture is Shoko Asahara. He was featured on a variety of magazines, portraying him as someone who possessed superpowers. What you and I may call jumping in the air, Asahara referred to as levitation, and he was so adamant about it that he convinced others to believe it as well. Now, the length of time I can levitate is about 3 seconds, but this period of time is gradually lengthening. In about a year, I should be able to fly freely through the sky. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's an actual quote by Asahara, and what's even stranger is that many people fell for it, and soon became faithful followers, looking forward to similar experiences. Internet.org was first published as early as 1997, during the very beginning stages of the internet, and to my surprise, there's more archives of it than I initially expected. However, the website itself was as lackluster as it gets, mainly featuring primary contacts and rough information about the cult. It was nothing to write home about, but given that it was the first iteration of the website, it helped serve as a steady foundation for the following decades of Alm's online presence. The last one on the list includes the anime series made about him. They were composed of several brief episodes that portrayed Asahara as a divine figure. Due to the language barrier, I can only understand so much, but the gist of it seems to be him achieving this supernatural state of being, where flying and passing through walls were not impossible. Apparently, anyone could utilize these powers, and all it would take to get there was to follow his guidance. Considering this was the early 90s we're talking about, the anime isn't exactly up to today's standards, but once again, it more or less achieved what it aimed for. It got a myriad of people introduced to the cult. Some of them dropped out of Japan's finest schools to join it, leaving behind their families, friends, and bright futures. Though it wasn't unusual for them to recruit scientists and other highly trained professionals who were mainly in between jobs or weren't satisfied with their current position at work. As for why he was hiring such scientists, we'll talk about later. Outsiders who attended this group had no idea what they were getting themselves into. Although it seemed like a peaceful yoga gathering center, we've already established that Asahara's intentions were much darker than meets the eye. Was fully isolated from reality. Once inside, contact with the outside world ceased to exist. As observed by the journalist Shoko Ogawa, all members lived in a purely imaginary world, one that combined primeval fear with a computer-controlled version of reality. It was virtual reality made real. Letters and phone calls to relatives were forbidden, and even people with no desire to join the cult were drugged up and were forcibly brought to the facilities. No one was safe, not even Asahara's own wife, who wasn't ready to become a committed member of As a result, she was beaten with a cane about 50 times until she was forced to surrender. A guy who was kidnapped into also suffered similar treatment. Upon entering, they injected him with an infusion drip of what the man describes as quote, unknown medication. These injections kept going daily for the 3 months to follow. On top of that, he also had to drink 2.5 gallons of hot water a day, as that was the only way he'd be able to quote, purge his system. The man was held captive until he pretended to have been converted to a follower. And even then, he was prepared to hand over most of his money to Asahara. On another occasion, a young nurse was locked in a small, windowless cell, resembling a freight container. She spent almost 3 months there, the entirety of which she was kept in handcuffs and was forced to eat food from the ground. She did, however, manage to escape, and eventually informed police about it. But frustratingly, they disregarded the report and at the time took no action towards it. She's still considered extremely lucky though, as the times someone got to leave the cult were few and far between. For the most part, anyone aware of this abuse would be forever trapped inside the facility, unable to get out. Has a disturbing history of conducting experiments on human beings. Headed by Dr. Iko Hayashi, a 48-year-old cardiovascular surgeon, it was nothing less than a nightmare laboratory, one where drug abuse and risky medical practices were commonplace. This time, the victim was a Japanese army veteran who was a personal bodyguard for Asahara. He remembers being handed over a glass filled with some yellow liquid, but that's about all he could recall before getting dizzy and passing out. When I came to, I was in a bed and didn't know what was going on. It seemed many days had passed, but I had no memory. When I touched my head, there were swollen spots. They were so painful, both inside and outside my head. It was a dull, aching pain. The spots you refer to were in fact surgical incisions, made at 4 points in the man's skull, one at each temple in the front and 2 in the back. And despite undergoing a CT scan, nothing showed up, leaving the true intentions behind the surgery still unknown. Some of these experiments also utilized electric shocks to wipe the memories of suspicious followers. According to Hayashi's detailed medical records, he delivered 7 shocks of 100 volts each to the scalp of Asahara's driver, which surprisingly worked as he couldn't remember he had ever driven Asahara's car. Unfortunately, that was far from an isolated case. A worker who tried to escape the compound received 11 shocks, and a male follower accused of sexual relations got 19. Dr. Hayashi was responsible for more than 600 electric shocks to 130 followers, with multiple of them inevitably having a fatal ending. It was these procedures, along with everything else, that led to an ever-growing body disposal problem, which at a certain point became too big of a hassle to simply ignore. Aware that a fire would attract too much attention, Asahara purchased a microwave incinerator, an industrial-sized oven that was big enough to fit a body and the perfect way to get rid of it. Furthermore, it allowed Asahara to become much more at ease with the act of murder. The members were all undergoing a 100-day ascetic retreat, when suddenly a 25-year-old man named Mijima Terayuki began shouting, displaying blatant signs of mental disturbance. He initially joined hoping to cure some mental disease, so if anything, his mental breakdown was understandable, especially when taking into account everything he had experienced up to that point. Made aware of his condition, 3 alerted executive members got a hold of him. They moved him to the woman's bathroom, where they attempted to calm him down by splashing water on him. This procedure obviously didn't work, so they hung him upside down and began lowering his head into cold water. Upon repeating this process multiple times, they checked back on Majima, but he wasn't breathing. He had passed away. And yet, they kept going regardless, trying various different forms of water torture on him. They ruled this case as accidental and kept it secret from the rest of the members, while his body was thrown into the microwave incinerator to never be seen again. Having witnessed Majima's premature death, another member, Taguchi Shuji, was aware of the cover-up and wanted to leave the group. But considering all the secrets Asahara had been hiding, it was way too risky to let him go. After spying on Taguchi, people even heard him say he wanted to kill Asahara for what he had done to Majima. This gave the guru 3 options. The first one was to let Taguchi go and risk him informing the police about the inside operations of the cult. The second one was to keep going as if nothing happened and potentially put Asahara himself at risk. Or the third and final option, killing him. Knowing Asahara, I'll let you guess which one he sided with. Taguchi was asked once again whether he persisted in leaving, the answer to which was a resounding yes, and that ended up being the last question he was ever asked. He found himself with a blindfold over his eyes and a rope tied around his neck. 5 people surrounded him. 4 of them pulled the rope up in unison and got him off the ground, while the last one cracked Taguchi's neck, getting his body to an abrupt stop as he fell to the floor. Asahara deemed this as an act of, quote, mercy killing. He related it to POA, a Buddhist concept that in his mind meant killing for the sake of your victims and providing them with a favorable rebirth. The actual meaning of the word is far from that definition, yet he used it as a means of justifying a lot of his actions. The killing of Taguchi did nothing but dig the hole deeper for Aum Shinrikyo, and as you'd imagine, it made them much more fearful of investigations by the government. This time, however, the government wasn't the only one coming for them. Upon hearing of multiple illegal activities, a lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto decided to investigate. He discovered that Asahara had been brainwashing his followers toward making extravagant purchases. Asahara claimed that his DNA was special, so they were willing to do anything to get their hands on it, even if it meant paying a hefty sum of $11,000 for it, a price they paid for potions made of his blood. And it wasn't unusual for members to give hundreds of dollars just for the privilege of drinking Asahara's bathwater or getting to acquire strands of Asahara's hair. The other product included his brainwave technology. You could rent it for the equivalent of $10,000 a week and be able to supposedly clone yourself with the guru by being on the same wavelength as him. The device was essentially a modified head that could transmit up to 10 volts directly to the skull. Needless to say, this technology had no scientific validity and was purely a product of science fiction. Yet, he somehow managed to make approximately $20 million from it, an enormous amount that still paled in comparison to Aum's $1.5 billion valuation. It was because of this exploitation that Sakamoto decided to speak out against the organization. He publicly criticized Aum for their actions and exposed that Asahara's claims regarding his unique DNA were a complete fraud. Having taken that step, he unknowingly entered a territory that had no going back. He put himself on Aum's radar. To add insult to injury, the information he had was also going to be disclosed on a television program. The network, though, was scared Aum was going to press charges against them, so they presented it to the senior figures in Aum beforehand. To no one's surprise, they weren't very fond of it, so the program never came to fruition. But at that point, Sakamoto had bigger problems to worry about. Aum had watched the tape and were now aware of his intentions. They knew that Sakamoto could build a compelling case against them, and if things didn't go their way, they would be at risk of bankruptcy. In their eyes, Sakamoto posed a bigger threat than ever, and if my memory serves me right, the last time that happened, it didn't end up too well for that individual. When Sakamoto's friends entered their residence, the apartment seemed deserted. With the order of Asahara to kidnap Sakamoto, 6 members in 2 separate cars drove to Yokohama's train station, but contrary to their expectations, he did not show up. After waiting patiently, they came to realize that a vital element had gone overlooked. They forgot that it was a national holiday, which rendered waiting at the train station pointless, as Sakamoto wouldn't be heading to work that day. Their lack of competence prompted them to come up with a plan B, and their next destination became none other than Sakamoto's own house. They arrived at the location at 3 a.m. and stumbled upon Sakamoto, his wife, and his 14-month-old son, all in a deep sleep. His son was the first to wake up. He began crying, so one of the men leaned over and snatched him from the bed. They closed his mouth to prevent him from being too loud and injected the infant with a lethal dosage of potassium chloride. However, the noise had already woken up both parents, who got to witness their child slowly die in front of their eyes. It's one of the worst nightmares a parent can experience. The horrific sight before them would undeniably be enough to make anyone's skin crawl, and yet, their determination to save their son outweighed their fear, and they jumped in without thinking twice. His wife fought desperately, but it only took a few minutes before she was forced to surrender. She also met the same fate as her child, and was given a lethal dosage of potassium chloride. Tsutsumi was the last one to pass away, but unlike his wife, he didn't have a quick death. Battling for his life, he bit one of the attackers on the arm, causing them to bleed out. He put up a good fight, but the truth of it is that the odds were always stacked against him, which led to his eventual defeat via lethal injection. But this time around, the drug did not work as expected. Even after several minutes, Tsutsumi remained very much alive, so one of the members used their bare hands to strangle him to death. Murdering the family took between 15 and 20 minutes. The next step included cleaning up the mess and removing all the bodies from the apartment. To their luck, the day prior was a holiday, so they didn't have to worry about being seen, as there was barely anyone outside anyway. Ultimately, they loaded the bodies into the cars, and by 4 a.m. set off on their way back to the compound. It was 4:30 p.m. when the 68-year-old Kiyoshi Koriya closed his notary office and left the building. Immediately after taking his first few steps, he was ambushed by 3 ARM members, who forcibly dragged him into a small van. Once inside, they injected him with a drug that caused him to pass out, so he remained completely unconscious for the rest of the ride. He wakes up in the evening, only to find himself as a prisoner in the ARM compound. When he looks around, he sees that he's been surrounded by a number of people, and that's when the gravity of the situation truly hits him, instantly realizing he's in big trouble. But there was one thing he could do to change the outcome of the situation, something so critical that it would be a deciding factor between his survival and his demise. It was a simple question: where can we find her? The discussion centered around his wealthy sister. She joined ARM about 1.5 years ago, and having donated about $600,000 during her time there, she made considerable financial contributions to the cult. But despite her generosity, ARM leaders felt they could cipher much more out of her. Months ago, ARM had approached her with a suggestion to transfer the ownership of all her properties to the sect and commit to becoming a monastic, an offer which she rightfully declined. It turns out that ARM's exorbitant demands had raised a bit too many red flags, even for someone like herself, as she soon left the compound and went into hiding. Her decisions didn't sit well with Asahara though. She had already taken a peek behind the curtains and knew way more than the average outsider, and when the money aspect was added to the equation, he deemed it necessary to track her down. Getting her brother to reveal her whereabouts would be the most efficient way of doing so. And that brings us to this exact moment. To make the process easier, Dr. Ayashi injected him with sodium pentothal, the same anesthetic they utilized when they captured him, but in this case it would be repurposed as a truth serum. They were hoping they could get Kariya talking, but the interrogation was cut short as he slipped unconscious. It's speculated that Dr. Ayashi was either unfamiliar with the right dosage or didn't know the effect it would have on an elderly man, because the very next day, Kariya was found dead. The kidnapping had taken place in full view on the public, and an attentive witness had noticed the situation and written down the license plates of the van. As it turns out, the van was rented, providing police with both renter's information and the fingerprints on the paperwork, ironically making the police's job 10 times easier. His death ended up being the nail in the coffin for the police to raid Alm. But to understand the full scope of things, we must go back to 9 months earlier, when Alm needed to test the effectiveness of a weapon they had been developing, a chemical compound that's known as sarin. The default form of this nerve agent is an odorless and colorless liquid that's exceedingly poisonous. The symptoms include a long list of unpleasant effects, a few of which are confusion, eye pain, muscle cramps, and runny nose, while the more severe ones include paralysis, seizures, twitching, and cardiac arrest. Exposure to it is lethal, and death can occur within minutes, even at very low amounts. And if the medical treatment is not immediate, one could suffer permanent neurological damage. Unable to buy the sarin, Asahara started his own chemical plant, Satyam-7, which was capable of producing thousands of kilograms worth of sarin a year. It by no means was the first factory he ever owned, but being equipped with 3 laboratories, a computer control center, and 5 reactors, it certainly was the one with the highest capacity. But despite that, the facility was considered highly unsafe, with an analyst describing it as having a high degree of book learning, but virtually nothing in the way of technical skill. Multiple incidents inside the facility further validate this statement, as many technicians inhaled the deadly gas and suffered sarin poisoning. It wasn't uncommon for sarin to leak outside the facility either, and when it did, it was so massive that it spread beyond the guarded areas to the nearby village, causing all the vegetation in the cult's vicinity to wither away. The villagers' disapproval of the situation was apparent right away, as they didn't hesitate to tell the police about it. But Alm was undeterred and saw them only as an obstacle that was getting in the way of their bigger plans. Plans which predominantly included bringing this extremely deadly gas to the public and killing as many people as possible on the way there. The effectiveness of sarin was still unknown to them at this time, but luckily for them, there was no lack of enemies whom they could use as lab rats for their experiments. So with a hastily assembled plan, they began a field test in Matsumoto. The targets were 3 district court judges, deciding on an estate case involving Alm's purchase of a piece of land. To conceal their identity, Alm had bought property using a front business. But once the property owner discovered it was Alm that made the purchase, he was distressed and filed a civil suit requesting compensation. Given the high probability of an unfavorable court ruling, Asahara saw this attack as killing 2 birds with 1 stone. They were murdering the judges while at the same time testing the sarin. As Monday afternoon approached, both a refrigerator truck and a black station wagon departed the Alm compound. The inside of the truck consisted of 6 men who were all headed to Matsumoto. But don't get it twisted, it'd be a great misjudgment to view it as just another regular truck. The vehicle had been highly modified to fit their needs. It included a computer-controlled vaporizing device, 3 tanks to hold the liquid sarin, a heater to turn it into gas, and last but not least, a fan to scatter the sarin into the air. Alm planned to carry out the attack during the busiest daylight hours, since that would ensure the maximum number of fatalities, which was a key desire of Asahara. 2 stops were necessary before reaching Matsumoto. At the first one, they took extra care not to repeat the same mistake they made during Korea's kidnapping. Recognizing the license plates had previously exposed their identity, they opted to spray paint over them, while the next stop entailed purchasing workman uniforms, as that would help them blend in and thus buy them more time to spread the gas. But despite its importance, the preparation process came at a cost they had seemingly not factored in: the cost of time. They arrived at their destination by 5 p.m., but by then the judges had already left the courthouse for the day. Their main plan had failed. If they were smart, they would have gone back home and called it a day. But fearful of informing Asahara of their failure, they opted to release the gas near the judges' apartments instead. The group waited until 10 p.m. for the right weather conditions to unfold. Unlike other weapons, the efficiency of sarin is significantly influenced by the weather, and the conditions must be just right for the attack to go as intended. And they came across that opportunity about 40 minutes later, when the wind had ever so slightly shifted directions in their favor. So upon moving their vehicles adjacent to the judge's residence, they began the process. To say it didn't go smoothly would be an understatement. Shortly after being released, the gas created a huge white cloud that surrounded the truck, long enough to attract the attention of several residents in the neighborhood. Panic instantly set in. Terrified for their life and the possibility that their gear may not be able to withstand the gas, they quickly fled the neighborhood. As the truck sped from the parking lot, the other vehicle ran into a concrete pillar on the side of the street, resulting in minor damage to the car. But that mistake was almost insignificant compared to what the team leader wound up doing. In a rush to get away, he forgot to close the nozzle of the spraying device, which led to a relatively small amount of sarin spreading out on the public streets. Nevertheless, it was enough to send several people to the hospital. Yet, fortunately for the judges, all 3 of them survived. It was due to sheer luck that the wind had shifted directions for a second time, causing it to go slightly north of their apartment. But despite this, some vapors still managed to get inside, sickening all 3 of them. The first emergency call was made at 11:09 p.m. and it didn't take long for hundreds of police and firefighters to show up at the scene, where they were met with the disturbing sight of people vomiting, coughing blood, and lying motionless on the sidewalk. That night, the hospitals were inundated with people seeking medical attention. The number of people in need of medical treatment stood at roughly 300, 40 of whom required hospitalization for more than a day. There were 7 fatalities, out of which 5 were discovered dead and the rest died right after admission. It took until the next day for the consequences of the strike to become fully visible. The gas had undeniably left its mark, and the detrimental effects of it were evident anywhere you looked at. The grass had wilted away, tree leaves had changed color, and the surrounding area was filled with the carcasses of various animals. It was a tough spot for the police to be in, as they were craving answers but had very little to go off of. They began by following a trail of dead flowers, surmising that the end of the trail would lead them to the place where it all started, and that appeared to be a citizen's garden. The house belonged to Yoshiyuki Kono, known as the first victim to have called for help. When it all unfolded, he was at the ground level of the house, which was at a very close proximity to the lawyer's apartment. He would remain in the hospital for more than a month, but eventually he was back to normal health. His wife, on the other hand, was not nearly as lucky. She'd slip into a coma and lose her ability to both move and speak. Tragically, she never recovered from it and passed away 14 years later. It goes without saying that Kono had a lot on his plate during that time, and the police certainly didn't make it any easier for him. They soon did an in-depth search of his house and found what they described as, quote, a treasure trove of chemicals, in the midst of which was the exact form of cyanide that's used to make sarin. These findings not only resulted in police labeling him as a prime suspect, but also sparked rumors about Kono's accidental production of the nerve gas. He found himself in a very incriminating position, but no matter how hard he tried to explain himself, no one would listen. To begin with, he was fully allowed to handle these chemicals, which was a perk of his previous job at a chemical manufacturing company. And even then, he insisted that he had never used them for anything other than his garden and his hobby of photography. Had the police dug deeper into the nature of sarin, Kono's words would have probably held more weight, but it took months for them to realize just how unfounded their theory was. It was practically impossible for Kono to produce the substance, as the production of sarin requires a laboratory, special equipment, and extensive knowledge of chemistry. Not to mention that excluding the cyanide, he lacked all the other essential chemicals to produce it. A few months down the line, Japanese media outlets received a cryptic 11-page document. It was titled, "Some Thoughts on Matsumoto Sarin Attack," and read as follows. It's impossible to make sarin from the chemical seized from Kono's house. Despite the police theory that sarin was made at the scene, the perpetrator very likely brought in sarin that had been made elsewhere. Ohm's supreme truth is guilty of the sarin attack. It has the manpower, materials, money, and the motive to deal with this mad weapon. As informative as it is, this portion is but a glimpse of the author's in-depth analysis of the Matsumoto attack. Though the author remained anonymous, identifying themselves only as H2H and TK, there's no denying that they were incredibly well versed in the cult's inner workings, thus making it easy to speculate that it was either someone who closely investigated Ohm or a follower who used to be a part of it. The media were dumbfounded by the document, and before they even got a chance to publish it, there was another letter inside their mailbox. Admittedly, it was a bit more rushed than the prior one, but the information it provided was no less significant. Given their shared initials, it's safe to assume that the author was the same person, and the letter read as follows. P.S. Matsumoto was definitely an experiment of sorts. The result of this experiment in an open space, 7 dead and over 200 injured. If sarin is released in an enclosed space, say a crowded subway, it's easy to imagine a massive catastrophe. Although unknown to the officers at the time, this single letter forewarned something truly alarming. It brought up a hypothetical scenario where sarin is used in a crowded subway, leading to a massive disaster. Whether it be a coincidence or not, it's eerie how on point the description was, because only 6 months later, this possibility would turn into a dreadful reality. According to police statistics, Japan has some of the highest conviction rates in the world, at over 99%, and that's for a good reason. They usually refrain from making arrests until they're sure it will lead to a conviction in court. I'm only bringing this up because Ohm was notified of an imminent police raid in mid-March, and as soon as they heard the news, they knew that their time was up. It was their first encounter with the profound hopelessness that many Ohm members were subjected to. Having a little under 3 days to prepare, Asahara knew that the end times were close. But as always, he had an idea. As a last resort, he prepared to send off a preemptive strike against the police, intending to create confusion and somehow victimize themselves. With the knowledge that it would likely be their last attack, Ohm wanted it to have a major impact on the population of Japan. That required 2 things: a large sample size of people, much greater than the Matsumoto attack, and a location that would impede people from having a smooth evacuation. So with that in mind, their next destination became clear as day. Being Japan's largest city, the early rush hours in Tokyo subways are jam-packed with people going to work. It's often so intense that people are pressed against each other and are left with barely any room for mobility, making it the perfect setting for the attack to take place. They aimed to spread the nerve gas among all the subway cars simultaneously, without arousing any suspicion, as drawing any kind of attention would have ruined the entire operation. So obviously, the safety gear they normally wore was out of the question. Carrying the siren itself, though, appeared to be a fairly straightforward task. Recognizing the abundance of people holding newspapers, they saw an opening to conceal the siren bags inside newspapers as well. Along with the siren, they also planned to carry an umbrella, the tip of which they could use to puncture the bags and release the liquid. Their plan seemed feasible, but it was anyone's guess how things would unravel in practice. And by 6 AM, they were on the verge of finding out, as everyone took the siren antidote and left the hideout in separate vehicles. They were divided into 5 teams of 2 men each, a getaway driver and another one who would execute the attack. Each team was assigned to one of the 5 subway cars available that morning, which were all headed to Kasumigaseki via 3 separate lines. The member assigned to the Chiyoda line entered the first station at 7:48 AM. As per Sahara's request, everyone was supposed to carry at least 2 bags of sarin, and he was no exception to that rule. After bringing both bags inside, he waited for the best opportunity to strike, and that moment presented itself just a few stations down the line. As the subway was approaching Shino-Chanemitsu station, he rested both bags by his foot and poked them with the tip of the umbrella. But his initial attempt was met with resistance, as the bags seemed to be more resilient than he had expected. So he gave it a couple more tries and ultimately only punctured one of them, leaving the other completely intact. Over the course of the next 4 stations, the siren had time to fully disperse throughout the interior. And upon arriving at the Kasumigaseki station, the bag captured the attention of 2 employees, who with no understanding of what they were up against, tried to get rid of it. Needless to say, their endeavor didn't go very well for them, as they wound up inhaling the fumes and passing away shortly after. Consequently, the train got taken out of service at the next stop, where everyone was ordered to evacuate the area. The next member boarded the Abiya line at 7:59 AM. He secured the seat beside the car door and waited for a brief period before puncturing both bags several times, after which he ran to the exit at the Ebisu station. Although it could be perceived as strange, his rush was no more unusual than someone running late for work, so no one bat an eye. It turns out that he was very proficient at piercing the bags, as both of them managed to spill on the floor until the very last drop, thus causing the excruciating effects of sarin to be felt almost instantaneously. Chaos began to unfold when the passengers noticed a very potent and unusual smell, closely resembling some sort of a disinfectant. They hoped that opening the windows would alleviate the smell, and while it may have had some benefit, it hardly mattered at that point, as the onset of poisoning symptoms had already begun showing up. With each passing station, their condition grew increasingly worse, and by the time the doors opened at the Kamiyacho station, the floor was filled with unconscious people. The officials had no idea what was causing the illness, but rather than investigating it, they chose to proceed with the front car completely empty. The train left the station behind schedule at 8:16 AM, but it wasn't long before it reached the next one and subsequently got taken out of service. Among the 2 subway trains operating on the Marunouchi line, one had its starting point at the Ikebukuro station. The train was set to depart at 7:47 AM, and you best believe that the member assigned to it was already on board by the time it did. Though, in contrast to his peers, he began having second thoughts when it came to releasing the siren. Deep inside, he didn't want to do it, but disappointing Asahara, along with all the others, would be too much to bear, so he decided to stick with it. Yet, overwhelmed by anxiety, he believed that the noise of the newspaper had drawn the attention of a schoolgirl, leading him to depart the train and change to another car to avoid her. He stumbled upon an opportunity to execute the attack when the train was approaching Ochanomizu station, but due to either his lack of attention or just bad luck, the instant he dropped the sarin bags, the newspaper cover slipped off. The bags were fully exposed for everyone to see, But at that point, he didn't have much time to care. So he grabbed the umbrella and hurriedly stabbed both of them before exiting the train. Many stations later, 2 seriously injured people had to be carried away. And although a myriad of other passengers had also reported feeling ill, the train kept going, eventually reaching the end of the line at 8:38 a.m. It only got taken out of service 2 stops later, once several station attendants had come in contact with the liquid and required immediate hospitalization. The other member on the Marunouchi line was situated on the opposite end of the route. Having boarded the Ikebukuro-bound train at precisely 7:39 a.m., he waited for about half an hour before poking the sarin bags. But despite giving it his best shot, he was fairly incompetent at piercing them, leaving one of the bags untouched and barely even making a hole in the other. Due to this, the sarin was very slow to disperse, and as a result, there were no significant injuries by the time the train reached its destination. While that may seem like a miracle at first, in reality, it was nothing less than a double-edged sword, as given the lack of injuries, the officials didn't give the situation the attention it required, and with no hesitation, permitted the now Shinjuku-bound train to begin its return journey. Almost immediately, multiple passengers began feeling sick, a few of whom had even noticed some, quote, strange objects on the floor. They informed the station attendants about it, and upon reaching the next station, the staff removed both bags from the train. Though, oblivious to the fact that the car was still contaminated, the train kept on its usual route to Shinjuku Station, arriving there at 9:09 a.m. By that point, the train had already done a full trip to Ikebukuro and back, and by 9:13 a.m., it was gonna return there for a second time. But luckily, just shy of the halfway mark, the train was finally taken to a stop, where the run was suspended and the passengers were asked to leave. Lastly, the final attack would happen on the Hibiya line. The perpetrator volunteered to carry an additional sarin bag on top of the others, but despite that, his execution went quite smoothly. He boarded the train at 7:46 a.m. and upon reaching Akihabara station, he proceeded to stab all 3 bags viciously, ending up with the most number of holes out of all 5. This led to an immediate sarin leakage, the symptoms of which began to materialize soon after the train left the station. By the time it got to the next stop, many commuters observed a small puddle of liquid surrounding the parcels, including a man who picked them up and tossed them onto the station platform, an act of kindness that quickly turned sour once the bag hit the ground, since it would soon disperse in the small platform area and result in the tragic death of 4 innocent bystanders. The number of casualties kept rising with each passing moment, and in the brief span of just 2 stations, 4 additional passengers stepped out of the train and collapsed to their knees. The station attendants didn't hesitate to help, but they, along with the driver, entirely overlooked the root cause of the problem. And it was only when someone pressed the emergency button that the driver got his first hint that something was amiss. But at the time he got alerted, the train happened to be in the middle of a tunnel, so they had to wait until the next stop to get out. The train doors eventually opened at the Tsukiji station, where the train was immediately taken out of service. And only about 20 minutes later, the entirety of the Hibiya line was shut down for the day.
As the poison gas leaked through the underground system, passengers at 15 stations in the city centre were affected. The government's described it as indiscriminate murder, a deliberate attack.
When everything is tallied up, the attack resulted in more than 6,000 injuries and 13 deaths. And that's with the purity of sarin at 35%, which was only half as pure as the sarin used in the Matsumoto attack. The higher its purity, the less odor and color it will have, and at some point it becomes nearly impossible to detect. Yet, the liquid used in the subways was more or less the opposite. Besides having a brown color, it had an equally as noticeable foul smell, both of which alerted the passengers early on that something was off. Less than an hour after the attack, stations were filled with people in need of help. Some tried to scream, but were unable to, as the gas had already impacted their vocal cords. Many others were laid on their backs with blood pouring out their mouths. And a number of other people had lost their vision, crawling in circles as they slowly surrendered to their fate. The scene was horrific, but from a Sahara's distorted perspective, it was an absolute success, albeit one that wouldn't last long. It was finally time. The police had gathered enough evidence to raid the armed facilities. The legal justification was that they were looking for clues in Korea's kidnapping. But come on, we all know they were expecting more than that. Over 2,500 police officers entered every armed building they knew of, making it one of the largest police raids in Japanese history. But contrary to what the police may have believed, all met several methods of communicating with the outsiders. So the raid was anything but a surprise to them. Upon entering, police found numerous chemicals that are commonly used to make sarin, thus directly affirming their initial suspicions. The search also uncovered a wide range of items, spanning from gas masks and protective suits to a substantial number of documents, among which was an unsettling publication that was still in its early developmental stages. The magazine noted that 2 years from then, a deadly gas attack would occur in the world's biggest cities, wiping out over 90% of the people living there, and therefore marking the end of the world as we know it. Thankfully, that never happened, but it's eerie to think that if they were left unchallenged, that could have turned into a very real possibility. On another part of the compound, police came across a Sahara's personal safe, which was found to contain over $7 million in cash and 22 pounds of gold bars. And upon scouring the compound's chapel, they also discovered about 100 armed followers inside, 50 of whom had been fasting for over a week and were severely malnourished. Everyone in need of medical treatment was sent to the hospital, and while the raid led to the apprehension of 4 members, it frustratingly failed on catching a Sahara, who, knowing his days as a leader had come to an end, had gone into hiding.
この映像をご覧の皆さん、皆さんは一連のマスコミ発表や警察発表によっていかにもオウム真理教がサリンを生成し、そして地下鉄にばらまいたかのようにお考えになっていらっしゃるかもしれません。なぜ私の生活空間の近くであると言われている第六サティアンのそばの倉庫からその材料とされている酸塩化リンやフッ化ナトリウム、あるいはイソプロピルアルコールというものが見つかったのでしょうか。まずフッ化ナトリウムについてはもともとサリンの材料というより、これは陶器の時の上薬の材料なのです。次に酸塩化リンですが、プラスチック製品の可塑剤としての研究および将来における販売をなすことと同時に、この日本がダメージを受けた時、水耕栽培をなし、その水耕栽培の時の肥料および農薬の作成のためのものとして購入されたということを聞いています。ではイソプロピルアルコールはどうでしょうか。確かに話によるとイソプロピルアルコールはサリン生成に必要なもののようです。しかしこのイソプロピルアルコールは、例えば皆さんが薬局に行ってイソプロピルアルコール売ってちょうだいというと売ってくれるような代物で、まさにこれは消毒薬としてエタノールとともによく使われるものなんです。したがってこれらの3つの製品が私が生活していたと言われている第六サティアンのそばから出たとして、それがどうしてそれによって殺人準備罪、つまり人を殺すための準備をしていたんだということになるのでしょうか。1997年から8年にかけてこの日本の大都市のほとんどは日米の戦争によって壊滅的な打撃を受け、そしてそれによって日本経済のみならず あらゆる面においての日本の資産は崩壊することでしょう。したがって私たちは1700名の出家司教者が生活するためにあらゆるものを独立採算、つまり他に依存しないで作ることを要求されたのです。私の弟子たちは高い学歴の者がたくさん揃っています。したがって未来についての個々の多くの希望と同時に研究をしているのです。その研究によってこそ私はこの日本が第三次世界大戦によって打ち負かされたとしてもその後の未来社会を素晴らしい高文明の未来社会を形成できるものと確信しているのです。
The video you just watched was a pre-recorded tape that Asahara had left behind. Throughout it, Asahara denied any link to the sarin attacks and claimed that these substances were only used for research purposes and were crucial for practicing their religion. It was nothing more than a desperate attempt to present himself as innocent, which became all the more evident by the other topic he brought up, the looming threat of World War III. Not only was he certain that it would transpire, but he stated that he'd be able to rebuild the entire society back up in the event that Japan was to lose the war. It took over 2 months for Asahara to finally be located, and in a rather unsurprising turn of events, they found him in the comfort of his own premises. He was sitting in a dark secret room that was no more than 3 feet high, which they had to use crowbars to access. He was accompanied by a bunch of pills, a cassette tape recorder, and over $100,000 in cash, after which he was directly taken into custody over multiple charges of murder.
A doomsday cult in Japan carried out a simultaneous attack using sarin gas on Tokyo's subway system, killing 13. Today, the man who founded the group and masterminded the horrific act is executed along with several of his zealots. Subobin has the full story.
The number of all members on death row amounted to a total of 13 people. It took over 256 court hearings for the decision to be made, throughout none of which did Asahara ever apologize or show any remorse to the victims. And in 2018, justice would finally be served. Japan is one of the few developed countries to still employ hanging as a form of punishment, and regardless of your stance on it, it's widely agreed upon as a cruel way to die. But considering the severity of the crimes, I think it balances out. Even one of Asahara's own daughters spoke on this before his death, stating that her father should absolutely be executed and that she's sorry to be alive when thinking about all the victims. Yet, Asahara's death did not bring an end to the cult's trajectory. Besides having an official website, the cult is now divided into 3 successors, appealing to people too young to be aware of its criminal background. The core one is known as Aleph, and sadly is still closely tied to Asahara's teachings. It's now mandatory for them to file a report every 3 months, which discloses information about the members and requests a summary of every business and asset they own. Having once had over 50,000 followers worldwide, it's now sitting at nearly 2,000 and is slowly growing. The future remains to be seen, but it's my hope that Asahara's actions remain forever locked in the past. Yet, it's deeply unsettling to consider that an army could be getting assembled as we speak, as they slowly prepare to carry out Asahara's legacy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.